Go her. All right, welcome to Limitless Ladies Network, our network of women helping build holistic, empathetic self-care and well-being. Our session today is sponsored by the Seroptimus International of Willimantic, and I'm pleased to have Joan Merritt, treasurer and board member, here with us today to share some of the information on this great organization. Joan?
Good morning, Tammy and ladies. It's so great to have you all join us this afternoon. Seroptimus is an international organization whose mission is to improve the lives of women and girls through programs that lead to economic and social empowerment. And we are a fun group of women. We get together once a month. We do lots of programs, hands-on programs, and raise money to support programs in the Willimantic area, like the Sexual Assault Center and the Domestic Violence Shelter. Right now, we are doing a fundraiser called Take a Stand to End Violence Against Women, which you can get some more information about that later. And our major project is the Live Your Dream Award, which is given to a woman who has gone back to school. She has to be head of household and she has to be enrolled in a undergraduate degree or certification, and it provides funds for her to do whatever she needs to do while she's getting her degree. And the deadline for that is November 15th. So you'll also get a connection to our website so that you can find the information for that if you know anybody that qualifies as that. Thank you for having me, and I'm glad to see everybody joining us today.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate that very much. So before we get started, I just wanted to note that this content is provided for general informational purposes only. It is not advice nor intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice in any way. Do not use this information for diagnosing or treating any medical or health conditions. Those seeking treatment for any specific issues or ailments should consult with a qualified physician, psychiatrist, therapist, and we make no representations, no warranties, nor assume any liability for the content that is herein. So welcome again. October is Domestic Violence Month, and yesterday marked October 17th, which was the National Wear Purple Day. And although it doesn't look purple, we're actually all wearing purple to stand for the survivors and to raise awareness about domestic violence. To support the women in our community, I wanted to gather a group of amazing ladies like what we have here that can share some educational information, resources, and some coping skills just to help us to improve our self-advocacy and to increase the awareness of this very critical issue. So joining us today, I have Kathleen O'Reilly, who's an adjunct UConn professor of Women, Gender, and Violence, Women, Gender, and Film, Gender Representations in U.S. Popular Culture, and Sociology of Sexualities. Lots of things you teach, Kathleen. And then Maria, say that last name for me again.
Busano.
Associate Director and Counselor at the Sexual Assault Crisis Center in Eastern Connecticut. And then I also have Paige Briggs, who is a child advocate and a community educator from the domestic violence program here in our local area. So my name is Tammy Dungan. I'm actually the founder of the Limitless Ladies Network, which is, as I mentioned, kind of to bring together women so that we can all support each other in a very holistic way. So that we can advocate for ourselves, so that we can all feel better about ourselves. I have been a victim of sexual assault and have been coerced into doing various different sexual acts with a partner from a young age. At the age of 15 was the first experience, then again in college, actually with my first boyfriend, then from somebody else that I knew. So I've had some traumas in my life that have been pretty difficult. I've actually kind of buried those for a while, and just recently have worked with some holistic practitioners, and that has actually kind of peeled back some of the layers and exposed the traumas that I've had, and it's become more real, I guess, in the last few months, which has made it kind of difficult for other relationships. So that was partly the impetus of me pulling together a lot of this and sharing this with our community. Just to be able to share this information with all of you. So to kick us off, I just wanted to kind of inquire with Kathleen first, because you've done a lot of studies and teach a lot of our young folks about the history of domestic violence and kind of how that you might see that that would impact those of us suffering more for women, possibly, even though it does happen to men.
Yes, thank you, Tammy. I'm really happy to be here. I could talk on and on and on about this topic, but I really am trying to keep it to like what underlies this? Why? So it's important to understand that there's a long history of intimate partner violence, especially against women in Western culture, and it goes way, way back, but one good example of the way it was taken for granted as just part of life is the saying rule of thumb. Anybody ever used that or heard, as a basic rule of thumb, we do it this way? Yeah, well, that refers to a common law that allowed men to use force against their wives. So they could use a stick, but it couldn't be bigger around than their thumb. And that's the origin of a very disturbing phrase that we just toss off the cuff, but was at one time normalized men's use of force. And this against women, especially, also children and animals. But see, I'm already on a tangent. So let me pull myself back and say that, yeah, it has a long history. It's continued. It's been brought to the U.S. and we find it in movies even today, right? When we valorize mild-mannered men who suddenly act out violently against some perceived wrong or person who has wronged them, or just the person who's in the room, right? I'm sure you probably all have examples of that. And we tend to frame it as like this irresistible impulse or oh, just this person lost their temper or has anger issues. And when we think about it in terms of a loved one, an intimate partner, often there is language like, oh, it's a crime of passion, or it has to do with, just snapping or something. And in a way, some of that may be true, not the crime of passion part, in my opinion, but it's noticeably selective, right? Who this person is losing their temper with or snapping at,
Mhm.
right? We're not seeing it happening to the boss or a person they hold in high regard. So,
Right.
yeah, yeah. And when we really go back or dig down to the roots of it, a lot of it comes from our adherence to the idea of a gender binary, wherein there's two and only two genders, and the characteristics and personality traits of those two genders have to be completely opposite, right? So think about it. If we've got one gender that's supposed to be the rational, logical one, who's also the natural one to be in charge and in control, um, then the other one has to be the one that is the natural follower and the one who is to be controlled, to be dominated, which is a setup that has not really served us well, right? So we have hundreds of years of written, spoken, and visual imagery that reinforces that demonizes and trivializes women as inferior in so many ways, because the person we're supposed to look up to is the leader, the rational, logical, in control, in charge person. And
Right.
yeah, and then if women are everything opposite of that, how are we going to look up to them?
Mhm.
You know? Sorry, if somebody wants to get a word in edgewise, please dive in. Like I said, I'll just talk and talk.
No,
Um,
I mean, so have you seen through all of this literature that you're sharing? So it seems that there are definitely patterns that have formed, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's the one of the root patterns is that idea of the gendered binary and how different supposedly men and women, girls and boys are. And it's like successful advertising. It's inserted into our lives continually at many points of contact and then repeated until it becomes a part of our stored memory. So we have many aspects of our culture that sanction this sort of masculine superiority, and we place the greatest value on them. And then we can look at ways that like our family and intimate relationships are constructed, right? They're founded on ideas of gender, but also on ideas of sexuality and ideas of how feminine nurturance and self-sacrifice. And
Right.
yeah, yeah. And
It's
there's
classic, right? When you think of families, to me, right? It's the father or the male is going to be the one who's going to be the breadwinner. He's the one that's going to bring home everything and really kind of take care of the family, right? He's the strong person that will defend any big bears that come, right? Going way back when. And the mother is just there to nurture, to feed, to, you know, take care of the little ones, but not necessarily to be strong in the relationship either. Yeah. So
yeah, and just listening to the way that's languaged, I'm not pointing at you specifically, but the way we language it is the way we think about it. And we think about big, strong protector, taking care of, and then just there with the little ones. You know, it's so minimizes, diminishes,
yeah.
makes less than this role that we expect, encourage, and reward women to take on when in intimate partnerships and in forming families. So and also women being expected to anticipate their partner's needs.
Mhm.
And then, like as you said, that the masculine financial duty, and in a capitalist society as we are, it's the money that matters. It's the money that brings power. It's the money that brings importance and respect and admiration
And control.
and control. Yeah. And although in a lot of ways, I think there's rhetoric that's like, oh no, you know, mothers are so important, mothers are so valuable, raising children, they're, you know, our future, blah blah. But do we put our money where our mouth is in that? Are
Yeah.
we really following up with actions that show we value women's roles in families, or are we following up with actions that say just, only, merely, those kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And then when we also expect from men for them to be non-emotional except for anger, I think that's about the only, well, I would say they get to have excitement if it's sports. But like anger is like the only thing they're allowed in terms of emotions. How can a person be a full human without all the emotions?
Right.
It's very limiting. And then it in an intimate partner relationship where a person has been raised to perceive vulnerability as this as a weakness, as a flaw.
Mm.
Going to try to not have it in themselves, and when they see it, especially when they see it in someone connected to them like an intimate partner, it's it may be, let's see, it may be not an instinct but a reaction to like attack that.
Yeah.
Um, so when we expect men and boys from very young to be powerful and in control and competitive and non-emotional except for anger, and primarily a sexual being and inherently aggressive and violent, and we expect women to be weak and not in charge and emotionally out of control and really just a nurturing being, inherently submissive and loving, we're setting up a dangerous dynamic between men and women. And it's almost like men who use coercive control and violence in partnerships are not really deviant or abnormal. They're kind of over adhering to masculinity ideals and cultural expectations. Now, I just want to make a caveat that intimate partner violence isn't just between men and women, and it isn't always men abusing or being violent against women. I am speaking to the patterns in our society with regard to gender, with regard to men and women, boys and girls, that especially encourage men to be violent against women. But that doesn't mean it can't and doesn't happen in other types of relationships, because it does. And that women can't also pick up that that relationship dynamic, or that, not, it's not a relationship dynamic, sorry, that pattern of coercive control, and enact it against their own partners or children or subordinates at work or whatever it might be. So that whenever a person who, for whatever reason, and there's lots of reasons, feels a need to be coercively controlling and uses that as a behavior to have their needs met, any person can have that tendency, and they have a whole script to draw from. That's been set up in our society going way back, and like I said, reinforced just about everywhere.
Yeah, I know. That's very unfortunate. So that's awesome to hear all the kind of historical paradigms, I guess, that have happened, right? And creating these unfortunate traumatic incidences in our society and continue, unfortunately, which is why we're here to educate. So Paige, as our educator for the domestic violence program, who is a superhero in my eyes to be able to help women and families so that they can take brave steps in order to be able to secure their well-being and feel safe, right? Because that is the ultimate goal. So what can you share with us, Paige, in terms of statistics on these types of events?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much. Lovely introduction. Never been called a superhero before. Kind of funny. I appreciate it though. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I wish I had grabbed or had been able to find specific statistics on, just touching on like the very last bit that Kathleen had mentioned about like potentially the LGBTQ community as well, because it's definitely present, right? Domestic violence is definitely present in that community as well. I unfortunately don't have the statistics on hand to go through that, but they are, I do know, at a severe disadvantage compared to the traditional heterosexual relationship in terms of receiving resources and help, especially due to the extra stigma on top of that community, especially in regards to domestic violence. So I don't have specific stats on that, unfortunately, but they are, like I said, at a specific disadvantage in terms of receiving help and services to exit relationships that are abusive, unfortunately. So some statistics that I'm just going to read off, and then I'm going to share my screen. I have some documents that I'll be sharing as well. So nationally, I'll start nationally and then I'll go specifically into Connecticut, right? So nationally, approximately 3.01% of the population is affected by domestic violence on an annual basis. And these statistics that I'm getting are the most recent statistics I could find, which was 2020 and 2021. So they are going to be a little bit different from like the typical, previous statistics because of COVID, and we know that COVID had a particular unfortunate effect on the amount of domestic violence happening, because all of these, men and women that are stuck in abusive relationships are now really stuck because you couldn't go anywhere, right? And there was a lot less that domestic violence programs were able to do in that time because of all of the restrictions that were happening. So these are going to be a little bit skewed from the typical, but nonetheless, these are the most recent statistics that I was able to find. So 3.01% annually, that sounds like a pretty small number. Like 3%, like that's really small, right? But when you break it down into like a specific number of people, it's over 100,000 individuals across the nation that are affected by domestic violence on that annual basis. That breaks down to approximately 20,000 calls to domestic violence hotlines on a daily basis. Okay. So that's a pretty big number. And then in terms of what Kathleen had been mentioning, right, like it does primarily happen to women. Women are unfortunately the primary victims in these situations, but it does occur for men as well. So it's approximately 33% of women will experience domestic violence in their lifetime, which breaks down to approximately 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women. So, even just the, what, 10 or 15 people that we have here today, that would
Oh,
be
right.
what, 1, 2, like 3, 4, maybe 5 women, just in this group that are here today, right? That could be up to 5 of us in this room. So that's quite a lot of victims, unfortunately. And it is larger for men. It's approximately 10%, so 1 in 10 men. Which is still a pretty decent. That would be at least one person in this room today. If we had I don't believe we have a male. If I'm missing a male name, I apologize. But I do think it's pretty much all women in here. That would be at least one person in this room today. That would more than likely have been a victim at some point in their life, right? So like I said, primarily does happen to women. Pretty big gap there, but it does definitely happen for men as well. And there's that additional stigma in the same way, or in a similar way that the LGBTQ community has an additional stigma because of the same-sex relationship aspect of it. Men also find themselves at a disservice or a disadvantage as well, because there's the additional stigma of like, oh, well, you're a man, you're, the traditional masculine, like toxic masculine understanding, like, oh, you're a man, you're strong, like how could you how could you be being abused by a woman? Like how could that possibly be a thing, right? It's hard for people who don't have the knowledge, don't have the understanding to wrap their minds around how a male could be abused by a female.
Right.
Yeah. And
And
then, sorry, go ahead.
hard for the man himself to admit it. I mean, it's hard
Yeah.
for women to admit it, but then for a man to be able to admit that to themselves,
Yep.
yeah, so many
It's
obstacles to coming forward.
Yeah, it's a whole additional set of barriers for a male, even like you said, like just at the starting point of being able to admit to himself that he's in this relationship that is abusive and that he's the victim in it, right? I feel like it would be a lot easier for him to wrap his mind around being the abuser, as much as that sounds terrible, right? Like if
Right.
he were the abusive partner, it would be easier to wrap his head around because of all of the historical context of being the, traditional masculine, head of household and breadwinner and like all of that, all of the things that are wrapped up into that you discussed, right? But yeah, definitely an additional set of barriers to wrapping his mind around the fact that he is the victim in this scenario and is unable to, or has previously been unable to get out of it and figure a way out. Okay, so more specifically in Connecticut now, again, 2020, 2021 reported statistics here. There were around 15,500 family violence incidents reported. So not necessarily specifically domestic violence, but family violence nonetheless. So rather than just being IPV, so an intimate partner reported situation, this statistic is open to, roommates, family members, on top of the intimate partner relationships as well. And in those reported incidents, there were approximately 32,600, give or take, quote unquote, involved participants. So that counts the offender and the victims. And that does include primary victims. So the person that we all think of, like in a heterosexual relationship, the woman is typically what we think about as the victim, and they are being the one that is directly affected in the moment, whatever the situation was, right? Whether it was a physical assault or just a very escalated like verbal emotional argument or attack, right? So the primary victim would be that person, but then there's secondary and tertiary victims as well. So secondary would be potentially, a child that was in the home that overheard this really escalated incident occurring. And then tertiary victims typically are those that get like hear the stories and are affected from an indirect standpoint. So this statistic, that number counts all of those people because they are all technically, they didn't participate in the initial incident, but they're all involved in that situation in one way, shape, or form. So it counts all of them. And then 36.6% of those incidents that were reported occurred in dating relationships. So that number is actually smaller than I personally would have expected it to have been when I read that number for the first time, right? You would think, based on like everything that we hear on social media and on, even in these like truly educational calls, right? A lot of it is focused on the intimate partner side of things.
Right.
And so for it only, I say only, it's obviously a terrible number to have any percentage of it being this, right? But for it to only be 36%, I personally was very surprised when I saw that number to see that it was only that of intimate partner, and the rest was the various family violence, roommates, family members,
Or just people that you barely know.
ex-partners.
You know,
Right,
what's happened to me, right? Just somebody
right,
in your circle of friends that
right.
you kind of have that as an acquaintance, or there's that connection.
Yeah,
You don't know them that well, but yet you know them still, right?
yeah, exactly, 100%.
Yeah.
And then, okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully I can make this work quickly. It's been a minute since I've had to do this.
Let me know if you can't share for some reason. Awesome. It looks like it's
Okay.
working.
All right. Do we all see it? It's like a purple page with a bunch of percentages on it.
Now we see it.
Yep.
Okay, you see. Okay, great. So I got all of these statistics from the CCADV website. Those numbers that I just read were from 2020 2021-ish time. And then this is an accumulation of specifically death statistics from between 2000 and 2021. So this page here is offender relationship. So this tells us there were 309 lives lost specifically in Connecticut between 2000 and 2021, specifically from intimate partner homicides. Okay. The breakdown of that is 86% were women and 14% were men. And then it goes and breaks down who it was that harmed the victim, who it was that chose to end their life. So 38% of these homicides, these victims were killed by their current spouse. So they were married at the time, and 38% were killed by their current spouse. Okay. 23% were killed by their current dating partner. So the majority, over 50% of these unfortunate unfortunate deaths, fatalities were what is the word I'm looking for? Essentially were done by the current intimate partner that the victim was with. And then from there, 19% were killed by the intimate partner they were currently living with. 11% were killed by a former dating partner. 8% were killed by the other parent of their child, but they were not married or living together at the time. 2% were killed by their former spouse, and then 1% is unknown of the relationship, or the current standing of the relationship at the time of the death. So like I said, over 50% were current intimate partners, whether they were living together, whether they were dating, whether they were actually married and like legally bound together. Over 50% were current relationships where the victim was killed by that current partner. And then this one is the breakdown of how the fatality occurred. So firearms are the single most common weapon used in intimate partner homicides in Connecticut specifically. 40% of those deaths involved a firearm. 33% was a knife or a sharp object of some kind. 11% was strangulation or asphyxiation. That's why we, in domestic violence programs, put a particular effort into trying to discover choking or strangulation, if that's ever happened, because that is a really big sign of a high-risk victim. 8% was blunt force trauma. 5% was physical force with hands, fists, or feet. 3% was other, so automobile accidents, fire incidents, things like that. And then again, 1% was unknown, the specifics. So obviously all of these statistics are incredibly sad, especially when we're getting into the breakdown of the fatalities that occur, right? Typically the average is 14 deaths per year, 14 fatalities per year in Connecticut. This year it's actually risen. It's the first year in a while that it's risen from 14. I believe we're at 19 this year already, and we still have 2 months to go, unfortunately. So I would be interested in discovering more about why it rose this year as opposed to others. But I don't have that information yet.
Yeah.
And I know I'm about out of time. This is just the last thing that I'll share here. This is a document with all of United Services. It's the agency that I work for. United Services as a whole is a community health agency. We do a lot of different things, but I work specifically in the domestic violence program. And so this document shows all of the services that the domestic violence program offers our victims and our clients. So we have a shelter. We have 2 shelters actually in 2 different locations. We do some case management for those clients that are in our shelters and also our community clients as well, because we do work with clients in the community. those within shelter, we do a lot of applications for one-time cash assistance from DSS, TANF, SNAP, Husky Insurance, trying to get them set up to get back on their feet and have their own set of independence. We do our best to help with long-term housing. Housing is unfortunately a crisis. It's an issue right now. So there's only so much that we can do because we're not specifically a housing program. But we do try our best to assist our clients in finding those a housing outside of shelter. And like I said, some case management services in addition to those things. We work with clients in the community. We do domestic violence counseling, which is a short-term educational program as opposed to clinical, because our program is not clinical. So we're not therapists, more of an education where we will discuss things like the cycle of violence, power and control wheel, red flags, green flags, healthy versus unhealthy relationships, boundaries, communication, self-care, trauma responses, like all sorts of things. And we kind of tailor it to each individual client and what they feel like they're needing to learn. And what they would benefit most from, especially, post abusive relationship. We help with legal stuff. We have legal advocates, or not legal advocates, we have court advocates, FVVAs, who can help at the courthouse. We do assist with like restraining orders and things like that. We do support groups, educational groups. We do community education, which is what I'm doing here today. Webinars, various presentations to middle schools, high schools, universities, various community organizations, things like that. And we work with law enforcement at times as well. And I have this information. I can pass it on to Tammy. I wasn't sure how to get it into a link to add to our agenda, but I could maybe send you the PDF.
Yeah, if you want to send me the
as
PDF,
well.
then what I can do is maybe just send it to everyone who's on the call, I guess, or I can even try to see if I can link it on the site. We might be able to put it on Seroptimus site as well as kind of contact information. And I am
absolutely.
just posting right now because you mentioned the power and control handout and then the know the red flags, which I don't know if Maria, you wanted to talk a little bit about, but there are links to that I just posted for everybody. So you should be able to go in and just download those. And it kind of gives you a little bit of information on the power and control, explaining that a little bit, and then just the red flags of abuse and things that you may want to be able to just kind of look through and say, hey, so how do we want to, is this something, am I actually in a relationship? And it kind of gives you some of those red flags. Or if you're starting to date somebody and you read through this list, right, and they kind of check off a couple of those boxes, then you might just want to put the brakes on and just like swipe left or wherever you go on some of these dating sites, right? Because it's not, it's not as easy to do as you might think. So awesome. Thanks, Paige. I appreciate all that information.
Absolutely.
And Maria.
Sure. So my name is Maria Busano. I am the Associate Director at the Sexual Assault Crisis Center of Eastern Connecticut. We are a private nonprofit. We are part of the Connecticut Alliance to End Sexual Violence. We're a standalone agency, but we do belong to the coalition. And they have divided the state into 9 territories. And I wasn't prepared, so I didn't. I'm not going to share my screen, but I'm just going to share this. This is a map of Connecticut. And the state is divided into 9 territories, and this is ours, so it's a little big. We cover 41 towns in Eastern Connecticut, and we provide, we're a sexual assault crisis center. We provide services for victims and survivors of sexual violence, men, women, children. At the beginning, when I started my career here many years ago, we really didn't see a lot of men. Men didn't come forward. There were boys that were being referred, maybe they had been molested, but they were kind of in the younger side. Now we have, a big part of our caseload is males that they're coming forward. So we think that's a great thing. So as far as some statistics, I wanted to talk about our specific area, and that's what I had to map, because sometimes people think that, sexual violence happens, people hear about it, but it happens somewhere else to other people. But last year, right on our map, on our territory, we saw 693 people. And that includes, all men, women, children. Still, the majority of the victims are female, about 78%. The rest are male, and a couple of percentages of people who identify as other. But 31% of those are children. So we have a big problem with, a large incidence of child sexual victimization in our area. And we do provide services for that. Part of our program is that we run 2 child advocacy centers where children can go to be interviewed if they disclose that sexual abuse has taken place. And those interviews are videotaped, and that is what is used as the child's statement. So they don't have to go to the police station. They don't have to be interviewed by DCF, the police. So a lot of times children disclose at school, so there's the teacher gets involved, the principal, all that. So that we don't do that anymore. We have the 2 child advocacy centers for that purpose. And those interviews are conducted by a trained forensic interviewer that's able to gather the information for court. And so, it's non-leading, and it's less traumatic for the child and the family. So, and I talk about that because, like I said, we do have an issue here in our part of the state. So we still see like 1 of every 4 girls would be sexually assaulted by the age of 18, and 1 in every 6 boys. And what I mean assaulted, maybe that's not the correct word. Maybe I should say they have had an incidence of sexual violence, which could be anything from being shown pornography, right? So impairing morals of a child, to touching, to just different things. So it's not what sometimes think about when you say sexual assault, you think about rape. That could be, unfortunately, but it's all those different behaviors. So the numbers are high. As far as adults, we have always said, 1 in 3 women would be assaulted in their lifetime. And again, we're talking about that continuum of different behaviors. It doesn't have to be necessarily rape, but that's what we're talking about. But men are, the numbers are not that different. And it's because before we just didn't hear from them. So now they're coming forward. My caseload is actually half male, and they tend to be older, right? They're coming forward to talk about something that happened in the past that was never addressed because it wasn't okay to talk about it. That men were not, they were not victims of sexual abuse. We were, like Kathleen was talking, boys were socialized to be strong, to take care of themselves, to do all those things. So that wouldn't necessarily happen to them. But now, we know it does happen. And so the services are there as well. So in sexual violence, sexual violence often and very happens with somebody that the victim knows. We know that a rape, sexual assault can happen with a stranger, but that's that is a small amount of the sexual assaults that we see. TVs, movies, they tend to show that as being, okay, that's a rape, right? Somebody's walking down the street, they get lured into the bushes and they get sexually assaulted, or somebody comes into their house and assaults them. Of course, that happens, unfortunately, but the majority of the victims are assaulted by someone that they know. And that could also be an intimate partner, somebody in that they are having a relationship with. And sometimes there's that stigma about, well, you're his girlfriend, you're his wife, it's not a sexual assault. Of course it is, if it's not with consent. So, so that a little bit of the difference between the domestic violence is oftentimes, or most of the time, might be somebody that is an intimate partner, where here it could be either, right? Somebody that they are intimate, living in the same household or whatever, or it could be somebody an acquaintance of some sort that's not necessarily a partner in their lives. So, it's still an underreported crime. People are not comfortable talking about sexual assault. Only about 15% of rapes, sexual assaults are reported to police. There's still that stigma about it. They don't think, if you ask someone, why didn't you report? Fear of not being believed, or because the offender was somebody that they knew, they loved, was in their family, they didn't want to come forward with that, or their family said, don't talk about it, don't say anything, it was a misunderstanding. You just, no, that's not something we're going to deal with. So
It's
very
hard
often,
that call, I know.
yeah. So very often, those those crimes are not reported. And then from there, very few are actually prosecuted because there isn't that you know, evidence that people think they're going to have, right? When we see Law and Order, SVU, and everybody gets arrested, and everybody, they have all this evidence and all that. That doesn't usually happen. So because we're not really asking whether there was sexual activity that took place, the question is whether there was consent. And sometimes that is what is hard to prove. And
right, it's a blurred line, especially when you're in a relationship, right? Or somebody. It's really tough as the victim to kind of have that proof, right? You just say that you said no, but what do you mean? I thought your body language said something different, right?
Right. Or you may have say yes to certain things in the past, but not this time. And
right.
That's the difference. But so that's very hard to prove, and is and it's difficult to talk about. So sometimes people still feel shame. Shame does not belong to a victim. No one is to be blamed for their sexual assault. But you hear all the time, it's easier sometimes for people to victim blame, to say, well, she was out drinking, or she shouldn't have gone out with that person, or, what did she expect? And so, but that obviously has nothing to do with that. People, we're in 2024, but there's still a lot of stigma surrounding sexual assault and sexual violence, even though, we know better. But like I said, it's been a little better since, the Me Too movement came out, and they gave people, I guess, the freedom to say me too, right? I did have that happen to me. And in this, like I said, especially men that started to come forward. So, but it's still, sexual assault still carries a lot of shame just for the type of, crime that it is. So sometimes keep it inside, right? So our agency, it has been here since 1974. So this is our 50th year. And we are, we provide services free of charge. We're totally confidential. Anything that is said to us, is confidential. Nobody has to, give information to anyone. They can feel free to call. We have hotlines, both in English and Spanish. Totally confidential. People can call anonymously if they needed to ask a question or they just wanted information. And actually, I can give those now, or I can just send them to you, Tammy, and you can just.
If you want to give it now, that's fine.
So the English hotline is 1-888-999-5545, 24/7. It's answered. And then the Spanish language line is 1-888-568-8332. Also, we have the chat, email, text applying only to English language at the moment with the English hotline number. We haven't gotten like the DV program. I know they operate 24/7 and they have all that. We just haven't gotten there. But during business hours, people can call, text, or chat, email the English number, and they will have somebody help them right away.
Excellent. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for all that information. And so last but not least is myself just kind of sharing a little bit about my story. So I had mentioned that I had multiple sexual assaults previously in various different relationships. And so I've recently just gone through some holistic healing with some various different practitioners that I work with, where they're kind of peeling back the onion of sorts. And some things have just come boiling to the surface of the last few months, which have made it extremely difficult for me. And I've kind of had these experiences and realized now that there's just been patterns of relationships from the time, my first incident was when I was 15 years old with a distant family relative that went to a drive-in and just he had his hands all over me. The second was my boyfriend that kind of forced me into doing things I didn't want to. And then a college friend who basically, I was waiting at my college dorm as I got back from spring break and waiting for my boyfriend, and the door was left open, and someone that I knew actually came into the door, slammed it behind me, and forced me to have oral sex on him. So I've had that. I had another experience, and then on and on. It's like all of a sudden I just buried all of these things, and then recently they just came bubbling to the surface. So it's been quite the journey over the last few months. Pretty hard to do that introspection and realize that a lot of the things were just patterns of behavior that I was kind of feeling that it was my fault, and it's not my fault. But you're kind of accustomed to some of the things, like Kathleen was saying, in terms of how you grew up or experiences that you had, and you end up getting into those relationships not realizing what red flags you should be aware of at first. So definitely download what I put into that chat so that you can look at those. But the feelings that also erupted were basically, being inadequate, feeling like I was depressed and frustrated. I would get angry for no reason sometimes over little things. Felt like I wasn't making good choices because I hadn't made good choices in relationships that I was in the past. And I think most importantly was just lack of control. Like I felt as though I was manipulated and coerced and kind of gaslighting and like all those terms that you hear. But I just didn't realize that those things were happening at the time that I was in the moment or in that relationship. So the lack of control was just something that I really wanted to get back for myself. So I have reached out recently to counseling, and it was very hard to make that very first call. I have to say it was challenging because I was trying to work through things myself, figuring I don't really never ever really talk to a therapist. So, and how can they possibly help me? But it is good just to talk about it. And even just talking about it with all of you here is actually a healing process for me. But talking to a specialist that can give you really good sound advice, being somebody outside of your family, outside of your friends, someone who can give you that unbiased direction is super helpful and very, very valuable, especially when there's services like this that are free in our own backyard. Definitely take advantage of it. It's all confidential. The other thing that has helped me a lot, and I've done for years, but I'm doing more so now, is journaling. So I could journal and get rid of a lot of the frustration, the anger, just thoughts that were in my head so that they weren't swirling around in there and causing other problems. And also just the journaling or writing things down, because in a relationship now, and those things are causing issues, right? So not being able to communicate or know how to communicate. If I could just write it down and give it to, my partner, my husband, and say, here, this is really the reasons why I am backing off on some of these things or why I'm feeling this way, I wouldn't have to confront him necessarily, but he would actually get a little bit better understanding of what it was I was going through. So that really helped. And then that opened up the door to a lot more communication for us within our relationship so that we can both try to heal, because it's not just me that has to go through this process. It's all of my loved ones that have to interact with me, and I have to learn to communicate with all of them. Another coping skill that I've got is exercise, which is really good. We actually just joined Krav Maga, which is self-defense, and kind of a kickboxing, like karate type class all in one, which I absolutely love. And I'm doing it with my daughter, who I think she really enjoys as well, because she gets to release some of her frustration. I get to release some of my frustration. We actually get to hit each other and it's a safe environment. But we're learning self-defense. So when we get into those situations, we actually can defend ourselves and feel like we're in control, which is something that we feel like we're lacking, or I feel like as though I've been lacking. But it also makes me aware of my surroundings a little bit more, and hopefully helps her to also kind of find that she needs to be more aware of some of those things. Getting outside in nature has been helpful to me, where I would just go out with my morning cup of coffee, get some fresh air, especially now with the beautiful leaves outside. So things like that. And also joining supportive groups. And it doesn't have to be like a domestic violence support group, although that can be great too. Just anything that you love doing. It could be an art group, a reading group. It could be the Seroptimus International group, or like just getting together with people that are like-minded, that share interests of yours, can actually help you to feel like you belong, can give you some confidence, can make you feel just so much more better about yourself, and give you your own space, your own thing that it is that you actually want to do. And obviously doing fun activities. So those have been my coping skills that I hope that will help for anyone else that might be struggling, just some little tidbits to help you get through. And obviously we have all these women here with their information that you can reach out to as well. I don't know if anybody else has any other coping skills that they wanted to share as well. Any of my experts on the call?
I just want to personally underline, emphasize that piece you shared, Tammy, about talking to someone outside your social circle. So your social circle, yeah, great. If you've got a supportive best friend, sister, whoever it might be, yay. But there's something about talking to someone outside the situation that is so powerful and so healing that I would just underline or highlight that piece of it.
Yeah, because even though I do talk to people, I've obviously girlfriends, we try to talk to family, but it's just not the same as having somebody that is completely outside that circle and just is there for me, right? Doesn't know the other person or the other issues or who else is involved in my life, to have that aspect. So that really does actually help quite a bit, kind of having that distance there. So I just wanted to thank all of you ladies for joining me today on this beautiful fall afternoon, and for all of the ladies that just joined us for this call to get a little bit more informed on some of this kind of critical issue that's been happening in our society. Does any one of you kind of want to just go around and give any last minute advice that you'd share before we jump off? We have a couple minutes.
Well, I just wanted to say that, it's never too late. Sometimes people think, well, this happened to me when I was a child, or it happened to me, like you were saying, in college, or I was 15, whatever. So I should be okay. I should just move on from there. But you actually have to look at it, to process it. And it's never too late. And there's never like, oh, you better just do it, in 2 sessions, or otherwise forget it. So that we don't have that, right? So you can take your time and it gets better. And I think that's the hard part, which, it seems like such a big problem, but once you do it, you'll feel better. You kind of drop the weight that you've been carrying around. So definitely don't be afraid.
Yeah, no, 100%. Going right off of that, I think there's a phrase that I've heard, and I think it's something along the lines of silence equals violence, right? So even if you don't necessarily have a supportive, like immediate circle of friends or family that you can go to and express, hey, this is happening and I need help getting out of it, I don't know what to do, there is going to be somebody out there. There are people like me, right, in the domestic violence programs. There are people like Maria with the sexual assault crisis, center. There are programs and there are people out there that are going to believe you and are going to want to do everything that they possibly can to help get you back to safety and back to independence. So just, it's finding the right resource. But there are resources out there. So don't keep quiet, because that is going to, maintain the abusive situation, and tell whoever you can, whoever is safe to do so, and you'll be able to be connected to resources that'll help.
And a lot of them are free. So, take
free and confidential.
Yes.
A lot of them are 24/7 as well. So
yeah.
Like I put up in the chat while Maria was talking, I put the state domestic violence hotline, and I put ours specifically as well, both of which are staffed 24/7, and they're free and confidential.
Perfect. Anyone else? And I also popped again in there, like the red flags, the other information that I had, Seroptimus International Wilmantic. I have the link out there if you'd love to join our our ladies group, which is a lot of fun actually. And we help to support all the young girls and educate them as well, and some of the ladies in our community. So highly recommend that you check that out. And then of course, go out to limitlessladiesnetwork.com, and I have some resources out there. This video will be posted at some point either today or at some point soon, and be available for you to review. You can share with anybody else that you might know that might be suffering as well. And you can check out past videos as well that are out there, and more that are going to be coming on various different topics, holistic and well-being and all that fun stuff. So we'll try to get it a little bit more upbeat too, but this is great information. And of course, thank you so much, Joan, for joining us and sponsoring today's webinar so we could help to educate and put this on for all the ladies in our community.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing it. It was a great hour.
Thanks. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tammy.
Enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks.